Hey everybody, what's up? It's Booksy. Today's May 30th. Be talking about AMC for the week. Um, so there's kind of a lot that we could go over. I just want to really briefly touch on the executive order coming up and the chart that I called the mother of all charts, and then the basically the scenarios going into this particular week. So just to start, this is essentially like a timeline of these executive orders. And the one that everybody's really interested in right now is this 14032. If you read it, it definitely says that the order here that's established expires on June 3rd. And what's supposed to happen is that they're no longer allowed to trade certain PRC military type equities. So what that essentially translates to is that if you've got collateral in these Chinese military securities or bonds or what have you, or funds, then you need to unwind, right, from the time this took effect till now. If they have not unwound, then, and it's not extended, that's another thing, right? Because they were given an extension, essentially. Then that means that you have the possibility that you'll get another very large movement, such as like the ones we had in January and June. Right now, I'm a bit indifferent on it because I just don't know. I know that a lot of people are counting on the fact that they haven't unwound, that it's not going to get extended, that grace period is not going to get extended, that if there is another update to it, that it might add more to the list. Those are things that I think would be bullish, but they're ultimately kind of speculative, and there's not really much else to say about it at this time. It's kind of like, well, if it happens, great, and when we get to that point, we will address it. But for now, I just wanted to point out that this is coming up and definitely could become a very huge catalyst. Now, that being said, you'll note that June 3rd is Friday. And to me, that kind of indicates that if they wanted to, push the stock down or position themselves differently for that event, then it would have to happen like right before then, right? And I think ultimately, like that's what this $34 push down is going to be about. Is just coming down and getting this low value before a possible move up. I'm not saying it's going to be a markup just yet, and I really think that next week, I don't expect, going into this week rather, that it's going to just be straight shot up. If it is, cool, but there's a lot of things here that need to be addressed. So number one, if you notice, we're at a really critical level. We're at this kind of midway point, and every time we've kind of crossed over this midway point, you see we really like push up and out. It's a sort of a way of measuring a possible run to the top of the channel. So that's right where we ended the day last week, is right on that mark. So we are right there. If we continue to push up just a bit, break out, then we'll see a substantial, I think, move begin. There's just no situation, if you look back here, unless it's like a quick out and back situation, there's no other situation where you have this kind of a push out that doesn't result in a run. And there are some situations such as this region where that run is short-lived, right? It only reached at that time, there's a lot of places that were touched on this particular run, but you can see from a glance, it looks like it hit, the 200 on the daily, for instance, and then it basically skirted along and then broke down. Ours currently is way up at like $22. In addition to that, we also have the top of the downtrend, which is at 25. We also have a possible resistance here. You see how I marked it out? That also coincides with that 25 region. So in my opinion, 21 to 25 is going to provide the most amount of resistance. There's also some pretty strong resistance right here at $20, which is sort of you can see here, it's acted as support and resistance at different times. This is where we kind of got hung up on this run to 34, not for long, but certainly like that could be a resistance zone. And then also the final liquidity floor here is like 1850. So I'm not going to talk too much about anything else that's more complex on that particular chart with the executive order. I wanted to show you a couple things. So over here on the right hand side, marked out some pretty key levels that we're going to have to deal with as we move up. Clearly, 25 is not on this list, but you have to understand that at this point, a break above that would really indicate a change, a great change in this stock's behavior. So from my point of view, it's very significant. Even though really there's not like a whole lot, if you look at support and resistance there, to me it's a very significant level. You can see that if you draw out fib circles from the top of 72, you can see that we basically are kind of coming up to another wave on our fib circle. And this is something that, it's kind of hit or miss, because obviously you can change this and draw it out however you want. I did it sort of like as a best estimate, and you can see that it's pretty close to where we find these moves up. And that's not a coincidence. It's just the way that stocks are timed out oftentimes. So we also did the time cycle chart. Not going to get into that one today, but that's just something interesting that I noticed. But yeah, these other levels here, certainly levels that are going to be key for resistance going up if we were to have a substantial move start. And all of these are going to be possible resistance points. Clearly, like I had my price target labeled out for y'all, and I labeled it as, going up to potentially like 52, this resistance right here. There's a lot of reasons for that. And in an effort to sort of make more like clarity, I actually kind of made it more confusing. But essentially, like what you're looking at is just a finishing of this bridge, right? And when you finish the bridge, you'll see that the volume flattens out, and then you get a nice ramp in volume. And that ramp in volume pushes up to the opposite side of the major dip part, okay? Now, you're maybe looking at this thinking, well, what if, Booksy, this is that bottom, right? The snowflake bottom is what we're calling it. What if this is the push up to 34? And this is like the coasting down, and we're really just going to see this kind of craziness next? Or what if we just experience this bottom? Well, I don't know. I mean, at this point, what makes the most sense to me is that essentially like we haven't finished the major bridge. I don't see what to me looks like the opposite side, right? If you're looking at this particular region, there's just nothing like full about it. So in my mind, I'm thinking that it's not finished yet. Like we're more or less probably right here. And I've demonstrated this elsewhere in other videos, but there's a pretty simple reason I think that this could be the case, is that if you look at the shapes here, it's basically just a bottom with like an up thrust that then goes actually lower. And it looks a lot like what we're experiencing perhaps right in our run to 34 right here. It's speculative, and yeah, we could be like here ready to mark up, but another main reason that I don't think that's the case, and I've made this argument plenty of times, but is just liquidity. It's just super light up here, especially the region from roughly like 35 down to 21. Very light, and it just doesn't look ready to go. So if it were to push up and continue past, let's say 60, which would be pretty wild, I just don't imagine, outside of the actual short squeeze occurring, that it wouldn't just have like a really violent pullback to come back and re-explore the liquidity, right, back down to essentially like this 18, 19 region. And that's why I think it's not done. And I know what people are going to say is like, well, you can't control this and yada, yada, yada. I'm not trying to. I'm just trying to interpret the way that the stock has already moved and then come to a decent conclusion about how it might move. Now, ignore this for a second. It looks really confusing. It looks like madness. So this was actually like my master chart, and I've been messing with it a lot. I'm going to explain it in just a minute. I know it looks really confusing, but it's actually, there's a lot of order here. So essentially, when you come out here and you break above, I'm going to turn on the orange. You'll notice that in a couple of these lines, after you break out above the top here, election day is November 8th. And there's a couple key things that line up with this particular period. So number one, there's this macro trend. You see this blue line right here? This macro uptrend sort of points to it. And if you look, it points to the intersection between what I would call like the macro downtrend and the macro uptrend. So I find that to be kind of unusual, right? In addition to that, if you look at where it lands right at 1838. That intersection here. I guess I could have done it on the other chart. Let's do it on the other chart, make it cleaner. Here. And in if you recall, in the timing of the other chart, you'll notice that like, okay, well, that was the day that you originally had said, well, maybe that's where we're going to find a turn, right? And I don't have it drawn out here, but I had it drawn out to where I thought probably here, right, would be the last down, and then you're going to move out. Well, not coincidentally, I think it seems to me that that would be like the ultimate target. So you would essentially have like a really substantial move that starts now, and it probably moves up to at least 50. It could come lower, but the lowest I'm thinking is like 45. If you break out of this downtrend, it's going to be kind of explosive. This is something I could totally see happening. This would fulfill a lot of different things right here, and I'll get back to that other chart I was drawing in a minute. But yeah, I mean, this is you can see there's like a wedge here that's very, very widening. And the natural location of like the next target is right around that 52. And then if you look at sort of the center point of it, you'll see it's that one place we've been talking about quite a bit. And I think this is kind of significant, because if you look, there's actually a lot that goes on at this level. And there's a lot of little things here that are, I think, meant to be like hints. I know that sounds kind of weird, but sort of suggests that, to me anyways, that, okay, and I know you're looking at this like, well, this could go way up here. And I'm like, yeah, I guess it could. But I think that this being a push out that essentially like exceeded this trend, and this being a push down right here that exceeded the trend, I don't feel like they should be included as much as these inner marks go. So I'm not including them. If it goes high, that's whatever. It's fine. But anyways, you see what I'm saying here? So this to me, and what this would look like essentially is a gigantic diamond bottom, if I'm not mistaken. That's exactly like what this would be. So you basically you have this sort of move, because let me see here. So the diamond bottom is this bottom that basically does this business, and when it comes back down, unless I'm getting it completely wrong, it rejects off this bottom. I'd have to look up the diagram. Anyways, I think that's what it's going to look like in the end. So I really am imagining like this is going to be moving very, very fast. And probably by June 9th to the 13th, we're going to see like a top. Okay. I know that looks crazy, but that's what I'm seeing. Now, the other situation where that might not occur, and this is sort of the bearish scenario, is a situation where basically you have another iteration of all this. So you'll notice that if you're paying attention, you'll see that there's actually 3 different iterations here that are occurring. And I'm going to use, I'll just use orange, it's fine. This one right here, so you have this bounce bottom followed by a run up and then an S-curve sell off. You have the same thing here. You have a bounce bottom followed by a run up, S-curve sell off. And then if this happens to be a smaller iteration, bounce bottom followed by a run off, right? And then what? An S-curve bottom. I was thinking about this and I was thinking, well, it wouldn't really make sense for it to come lower, because in this case, you see how this bottom did come lower and then this went lower, but in this case, the bottom went higher. So this one may come higher. And what's fascinating is that if you look at that other chart I was showing you, it actually would make a lot of sense to have it break out here, right here, finally come back. So like break out for a minute, finally come back and reconfirm this line. Now, I don't feel like there's a whole lot of time to do that. So it would have to be pretty quick this week. I'm talking about like 1 day major breakout, right? Maybe all the way up to like almost 18. And then a pullback that basically comes all the way back down to like that $14 mark again. And this would be the confirmation. You'll notice that when it confirms, see how it did it here, break, then pull back. That's exactly what I'd be looking for. So if we were making a comparison, I would say like this wick right here is essentially like where we quote unquote could be. The next one would be a bigger push out and then a pullback the next day and then another move up in towards the weekend perhaps. So to me, like I'm looking at that as really important, because if it doesn't do that, right, if it doesn't confirm, then you have a situation like this where it could easily like fall back below and then you're going to come lower, like significantly lower. And at that point, I'd be looking at that like 1175 again. But it actually makes a lot of sense if that last iteration occurs and it's basically like that S-curve down, right, to confirm that center mark. And that would be the major, then you'd have like a major push after that. So this is still like what I'm going with. I wanted to talk a little bit about this and then I'll wrap it up and keep it short today. So I know this is super confusing, but basically what I'm doing here is I'm looking at a couple things. Number one, I was looking at these hook marks. So there's sort of like, let's look at this a little closer. This looks like madness. All right, so these are your iterations. So like orange, purple, blue, yellow. And I thought it was really interesting. There's a correlation between supports and these crosshairs. And if you look at like the blue specifically, so let's try to clean this up just a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. I don't think turning all these off is going to necessarily help like too much, but might help a little bit. Some of these aren't grouped correctly. So if you look at the blue here, you can see that this downward top angle pointed to what I would call like the spring bottom. And that's pretty normal, right? We've talked about these crosshairs quite a bit in recent days, and also, you know, talking about the sine waves. Well, the bottom also does that, kind of points to the top. And I went and I looked at each of these, and I noticed that they were sort of converging, and they're all coming from basically here. I know it's not like perfect the way I drew it, but they're all basically coming from this touch point. And it's essentially like a speed resistance fan from here, probably everywhere. Like it probably has like a million speed lines, okay? I'm not going to draw them all. I drew a lot of them. But you can see that, okay, so the blue, basically the blue arc begins here, right? It comes down, and this provides like the momentum for this move. Well, I was checking out all the others, and they all sort of check out. Like the yellow does the same thing here, where it provides like a momentum arc for this move. And sure enough, like the crosshairs almost lined up with the blue, and that's where things started getting weird, because I noticed that this is where things get crazy. I noticed that there's a lot of momentum arcs that I'm not really sure yet what to do with, but I noticed that the purple one obviously is expanded, and I was like, well, where does it go? And sure enough, you can see that this top marker does point to the next spring, just like the blue did. So the bottom marker should point, just like this one did, just like the yellow did, should point to the next top. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, well, if you were to get to the next top very quickly, sure, you could say it can go to 52, but that's like a day or two, you know, that's like too fast. So that had me thinking, like, perhaps, you know, perhaps it's not going to be that fast, and perhaps it's really not going to get there till, you know, again, like later on, like maybe the 9th. You can see that's right around that mark. So that's a possibility, you know. And in looking at this major, so there's like another one, right? So in looking at this major down and up, these are quite narrow compared to these. These are very wide. So clearly, like here you have a widening spread. Well, the red one, this line right here, it does also point to sort of that area of 52. Actually, it's really weird because it points to, you can see how I did the crosshairs here. All these intersect along the same trend line, which is weird. I don't really know why and I can't really put my finger on what this is, but they all basically crosshairs right around the same line here. Well, this red one actually intersects on June 17th right at that value. So it's really fascinating to me because this is something that happened a long, long time ago, right? And this particular trend happens to line up perfectly with this this final futures expiration. So part of me was wondering if this could last through like June 17th, and it's actually not going to be, because remember originally I said like, oh, it'd probably take about 7 to 8 days, and 7 to 8 days from now is really different than it was earlier. We thought it was going to run about 3 or 4 days ago. So at this point, you know, yeah, it just seems like there could be quite a bit that happens if it needs to get up there. I could see that happening. In terms of like halfway points, this is also significant because you see how the halfway point here actually lines up with, and as it does with the yellow as well, there's actually a resistance there on that cross marker. So for purple, that's at $24. So again, it was like this, it's like, okay, clearly that $24 range is in the crosshairs at $24 to $25 range, which is where we're going to experience more or less like that breakout occur. So I think up until that point, outside of like the possibility of another iteration, so like pushing all the way up to like 19 and then like maybe pulling back again, I think that's a possibility for sure. And we would want to see it test that midline. But then after that, like if that occurs, which it should maybe over the course of a day or two, we want to see it push all the way up to like 25. So after 25, you need the break of 34. That's really significant because that puts you back in this upper range, which we haven't been in since November of last year. That'd be a really big deal. And that would probably catapult you all the way up to the top here. So the most difficult thing right now is just going to be timing it. You know, I would love to say it's just going to go straight up and it's done that before, right? And June 3rd being just right around the corner, it seems likely that that could be a major catalyst. So it would be, in terms of timing, it would be interesting to see it push up tomorrow, pull back on the 1st, and then the 2nd to the 3rd, the 3rd being like the Friday, kind of resettle, right? Retry to get back up. Maybe even end the week lower than like 19 or something. I mean, I'm not saying like that's what's going to happen, but it would make sense to me. It would look a little bit like this, right? And it would make a lot of sense to me for that to occur this week. And then afterwards, on the week of the 6th, is where you get your major moves. So watching this play out, obviously different than the way that, anticipated it sort of playing out. A lot of this stuff sort of threw us off, right? Like the future exposures, the short interest dates, things seem to line up to indicate that we would be moving originally by like May 20th, and that didn't happen. But ultimately, a big move is a big move. I don't think anyone's going to complain about it. It's just trying to position yourself in a way that you can kind of capitalize on it the best you can, right? So that's what I'm anticipating for the week. And outside of that, I don't know. I may not be streaming too much this week. We'll see. But I'll let you know if I hop on. So, all right, y'all have a good one.